Hey everybody, it's Romania Black, and we are on episode 4 of Death Note. Oh, I'm so excited. So yeah, I just finished watching episode 3 in the dub. It's great. It's great. It's a nice refresher before starting. I think what I'm going to do is probably watch the dub episode right before starting the next episode, because it's a nice refresher. I'm watching these like once a week, and so it's a nice refresher of what's happened, and it's in the dub, so it connects. I can be getting notes ready and stuff while I'm listening and being like, oh yeah. So yeah, Light's been offered this deal, half his lifespan, to get the Shinigami eyes. I'm curious, after watching this last episode 3 again, I was like, I wonder if there's other parts of the Death Note rules that Ryuk can offer Light in exchange for just half of that remaining lifespan over and over again. So, for example, he could offer him the Shinigami eyes for half his lifespan. Maybe there's another thing he can offer Light for half of that additional lifespan and just whittle Light's life away until there's nothing left. I don't know. I don't want my theories confirmed or deconfirmed. That's the thing. I don't want spoilers. I just want to let my theories ride themselves out until they're proven right or wrong. And then we'll go from there, right? But I do have some comments before I want to start. Episode 2 has aired on YouTube and episode 3 on Patreon yesterday. So I've gotten some comments that I want to go through, and then any more that I find between now and episode 5, I'll put in there. But Robin Hood Productions, there were 2 comments you had, and I wanted to bring those up. In episode 1, the idea of Light striking fear, because I had questioned in episode 1 why Light would give instant heart attacks to the hard criminals that were in jail already and arrested, and why he would give dramatic, deaths to the ones that hadn't even been convicted but were just suspected of harassment or other wrongdoing. And Robin Hood Productions brought up a really good point, and several of you did actually, but Robin Hood was the first one that I saw. And it's the idea of striking fear. The idea that Light's like, no, these criminals that have been arrested, yeah, they're going to die, and I'm going to kill them instantly. But the idea of giving these more elaborate deaths to people that have not been convicted yet is just to create fear, being like, if you do wrong, here's what could potentially happen to you. Even if you've not been arrested, if I catch you doing wrong or suspect it, I will give you these violent, prolonged deaths. And it's like, And so I was talking to the truck on note with that, and I'll get to the truck's comment later, but the idea of fear. And fear doesn't have to be a bad thing necessarily, right? I kind of got a little bit preachy with it in the last episode, but honestly, the reason why we don't do things a lot of the time is just because of fear. And that doesn't have to be like a criminal act. It can be like, oh, I don't want to go skydiving because I'm afraid I could die. There's that thing. That's not necessarily a crime, but like, I don't want to ever go skydiving because, yeah, there's a chance you could die, and I'm afraid of that. And so, no. So it doesn't have to be a crime that fear prevents you from doing it, but fear is a big human deciding factor because humans tend to naturally have like a survival instinct. And so, yeah, that's really interesting to note, but it's going to be interesting to see how the morality of everything starts to get into play with this. And my big thing is not so much that fear is causing people to not commit crimes and preventing them from like doing these actions. It's more for me the fact that it's Light creating this fear and doing this whole God complex thing. I think that's where my whole beef with it is, that this one human is enacting themselves as a god and creating this fear. That's where I get a little bit like, oh, but yeah, I agree that the idea of fear itself being a deterrent isn't necessarily a bad thing. I feel like there's going to be some interesting conversations about that as we develop, which is really exciting. But they also pointed out, I questioned the font of the actual title that's in the thumbnail and in the show, and Robin Hood Productions pointed out that HNO, which is the letters that are kind of messed up, is actually the chemical formula for an anti-heart attack drug. I'm like, oh, clever. I like it. I like that a lot. Oranges and Grievers pointed out the idea, this concept of justice, right? And that seems to be one of the big moral issues in this series is justice. We have L's version, we have Light's version that's been purported here. And they commented, they're like, the whole eye for an eye thing, like, what about robbers? Is that really like the robbery? Is that really an eye for an eye system? And I'm like, yeah, that's a really good point to bring up, is that true? We treat typically crimes, you get arrested, but there's a variety of crimes and factors behind them. So the idea of like a robbery, if no one died during the robbery and they just got arrested for robbing the bank, but no one was killed in the process, does the eye for an eye thing really fundamentally, how does that work versus like a serial killer or versus like an arsonist or something like that? Like there's such a variety of crime, and a lot of them get the same punishment of prison, even if it's not a death sentence. So that does bring up like a whole new host of things with morality and passing judgment and things like that. And we've been talking in the comments about like the Japanese imprisonment system versus like the US, and it's a totally different thing. So there's lots of different factors being brought up, and not all of the murders Light has committed so far have been Japanese. There's been people around the world. So that brings a whole host of things to do with it. So it's fascinating, but I'm glad you brought that up, Oranges and Grievers. That's a really cool concept to make note as we go further into this series. Some dude pointed out that the formula, I'm glad you pointed this out because I tried to do the math like on my own outside of this. Again, English major, math side of the brain. I got really close. I got to like 107 years and I was like, that's close enough, but it didn't make sense. I was like, wait, no. But some dude pointed out that in an interview, the author, the mangaka, and the artist for this series said that they had came up with a formula to determine Light's lifespan on their own, and then they forgot it. So I actually love that because I like the idea that they're just leaving it ambiguous. It's for the audience to try and interpret, and there is no answer. I actually like that. I like that there's no way for the audience to determine. We don't know unless they tell us what Light's lifespan originally was. It's going to be cut in half because I'm pretty sure he's going to take the eyes, but we'll get there, right? Anastasia pointed out also that with Japanese culture, the idea of saving face is culturally like really big in Japan, and so it makes sense that they would want to keep any dirty laundry or any dark side of their organization secret, which I definitely get that. I'm from the US, so dirty laundry gets out all the time. But I do think it's a neat cultural thing to point out. And I do notice that with a lot of anime, a big plot point is exposing the dark, seedy underside of things. And that makes a lot of sense if in your actual culture, those things are not often aired or they're viewed as taboo, that anime is a outlet and a medium to show that and express it in a way that is kind of somewhat removed from reality, but not entirely. So thank you, Anastasia. That's really cool to point out. And then finally, the truck pointed out two things. One, that would Light be on board with a figure like Kira if it wasn't him? I don't think he would. That's the funny thing. I think that Light would totally be against someone that was functioning as a god and passing judgment. I think Light would actually, if it wasn't him doing it, I think Light would be like, well, how does he get to decide? You know, I think his ego is just that big that he'd be like, well, how does he get to decide? And why not me? You know? So I do think Light would be against someone like Kira, or would at least want to find out who Kira is. That's the thing. But that's an interesting question to kind of think about as we go further, is that I'm curious to see what Light becomes in all of this as he goes through this transition to becoming a god and what that deals with. So that's going to be interesting. But yeah, on note as of episode 3, I don't think Light would be on board with someone like Kira, just because it's someone making decisions for him. But as long as he's making the decisions, maybe it's a little different, right? So, and then finally, apparently in the manga, and I don't know, I may read the manga on my own after this series is over and do like a soapbox review of it or something on my own time. I don't think I'll do reactions to the manga. I think I'll just review it and read it on my own time. But they did note that Ryuk talks about them being roommates, and I guess in the manga, him and Light play Mario Golf. I love it's not Mario Kart, it's not Mario Tennis, it's not Mario Party, it's Mario Golf, which to me is like the most obscure Mario game. Maybe not, maybe it was really popular in Japan, but also golf seems really fitting for Light for some reason. It just seems like just elitist enough, because Light's from a pretty posh house, his family. That was another thing that was commented on too, is the idea that apparently some people think that Light, there's a theory that Light doesn't have a good home life. I don't know. Maybe as the series goes on, don't confirm or deconfirm, but maybe as the series goes on, my opinions of that will change. But even watching the English dub in the last episode, the English dub really does not make it seem like it's bad at all. Everybody's like, oh yeah, everything's great, swell, we got a great home life here. The only thing that is worth noting is that they do only really talk to Light about his studies, but what other hobbies does Light have? I don't think he has any other hobbies. I think Light, pretty much, he was a bored kid. He didn't have any other... Now, in hindsight, maybe he should have found a hobby to keep his time, you know? Maybe they should have encouraged him to play soccer or something rather than become a god. But yeah, or golf. Maybe he should have become a golfer. But yeah, I don't think Light has a bad home life. I think that's going to be kind of one of the points, is that he had a really good home life and a good life. And it's going to be like a Shakespearean tragedy. It all went downhill because he found this death note. And it was just ruined. That's my theory anyway, but I don't want to be confirmed or deconfirmed. We'll see as we go. So yeah, those are my notes on episode 4. I don't know if we'll need Whiteboard Coon this episode. We brought him out last episode, but I don't know if we'll need him this episode. We'll just have to wait and see. But yeah, this series, and 10 minutes in, so let's not waste any more time. I'm excited to see what all is going to happen, y'all. But let's dive in. We're going to start episode 4 of Death Note here in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and let's go. Oh God! Oh my gosh! So yeah, no big deal. Man, this was a very, very, very interesting standalone. It seems like a standalone episode. That's the thing. This seems like a cut and dry standalone episode that its only purpose was to point out the identity of our poor boy Ray, old Ray Pember, that's like, oh honey, there's stuff to talk about him and oh Yuri, poor Yuri. I feel bad for her. I feel bad for Ray. But yeah, it seems like this was just a standalone episode to point all that out. But the front part of this episode, there's so much that's been like foreshadowing and like, okay, how about that? Let's talk about that. I definitely want to talk about it because it's interesting, right? There's little things that I'm like, is this setting up for later? And I don't want to be spoiled, so don't confirm or deconfirm my theories. I don't want to be spoiled, but okay, so this episode was great. This series so far has been really, really good. And the episodes are only like 23 minutes. They go by so freaking fast because there's like a minute long. They're only like 20 minutes long. I'm like, oh, I'm left wanting more. It tempts you by wanting more with this series. But okay, it's interesting. I do think that Light doesn't underestimate L. I think Light's kind of on the ball with L. But the thing about L is, I think that there's part of Light's view of him that is accurate. L hasn't totally figured Light out. But I'm like, Light really thinks that he has got the upper hand. And Light's like, I totally am fine with this. No worries at all. I'm going to figure out the name of this Ray guy, get him out of the way. And when we get to that, we'll talk about it. But I'm like, if Light doesn't plan this out just right, he's going to out himself. And I'm so curious to know. I'm curious to know if the woman in the OP is holding Ray, if she's connected to this, if she's holding Ray, if something's up with that. Getting more on L. Like, I'm so curious to know what the deal is in all of this, right? And then this girl in the OP is not the Yuri girl that he went on the date with. So I said in the OP in the reaction that I have a feeling that girl, my theory with her, and I don't want to be proven or disproven yet, we'll find out when we get there, is that at the time I was like, he's going to take the Shinigami eyes and he's going to find out that she doesn't have long to live and he's just going to use her. But we could talk about that whole Shinigami eyes thing. He turns down the deal, which I think is really fascinating. So we couldn't do that recap, and we get Ryuk's deal that if you take the Shinigami eyes, you can see the name and the lifespan of that person left, and you'll instantly know their name. You won't have to do any research, right? So there's that, which would be very convenient and help Light out a lot. And I really thought, this episode's called Pursuit, which is apt. I really thought that Light would take it. I really thought Light would take the deal, but he doesn't. And it makes sense why he doesn't now. It makes sense. I wasn't thinking of the picture as a whole. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But before we do that, we get back to the Shinigami world where they're all chickening on Ryuk, being like, haven't seen him in a while. The Shinigami designs are so cool. I love the Shinigami who has the skull and it has the hat on top. It looks like a mask. not a hat, but like a mask. It looks like it's like the top of a hoodie pulled up, but the mask is the head talking, and the skull is just part of its neck. That's so freaking cool. I love that design. It's so creepy and neat. And they're like, I haven't seen Ryuk lately. And then we have this guy that looks like a bomber, like a pilot, and he's got like the red spade on his head and the goggles. I'm telling you, I don't want my theories confirmed or deconfirmed, but there's like a human aspect to the Shinigami. And I don't know, because it seems like this series is making a point to say that the Shinigami are not human, that they're not human, they are their own beings. But I wonder, since they write the names of humans in the Death Note, if they come across a human that gets a Death Note, or if they have a situation like Light and Ryuk, when that human dies, I wonder if the Shinigami takes on part of them as themselves. So maybe with Ryuk, like the belt and the earring are like humans that Ryuk has killed before, that he's taken on part of them. Like it's almost kind of like they absorb part of their soul into them. I mean, we've established that Light can no longer go to heaven nor hell. So if he doesn't become a Shinigami, maybe he becomes at the end part of Ryuk, and that's kind of that limbo. He becomes part of Ryuk's soul, and then he's stuck there neither in heaven nor hell. I don't know. I guess we'll find out. But the Shinigami designs are just laying around. Did he really lose the Death Note in the human world? And a lot of these have like animalistic, like insect, like armor and things like on them. The Death Note was probably picked up by a human before he got to it. And they're like, oh, it couldn't be. And there's this like bird, like this bird, like Shinigami hanging off. This one Shinigami, they're like, if that happened, he'd have to follow that person around until that person dies or the Death Note is destroyed. So the Death Note can be destroyed. We just don't know how yet. I figured you couldn't just burn it or something. That seems far too easy. But maybe it is that easy. Maybe that's part of the temptation, is that it's so easy to destroy, but a human won't do it because that's far too tempting. Why would you get rid of something that's as powerful as the Death Note? But this guy, this one that has like the mechanical body parts and the hands and all the jewelry and stuff, and there's skulls made of like diamonds and gold. Interesting. It almost looks like the king, but I don't think so. Yeah, I can't picture Ryuk doing something so tedious. Well, yeah, and that's interesting. They don't think Ryuk would stick around, but Light is far from tedious, right? And Ryuk's having the time of his life, so they really just don't know the extent of how Light is. And they just think if it was an everyday human, then Ryuk probably would be bored, but Light is not the case. That's why Ryuk's like, no one else but you. No one better than you could have picked this up. Like, you're the most entertaining person that could have picked this up. So that all makes sense. And then this guy, though, he's not the old man, because he says, I've heard he was carrying 2 Death Notes. And they're like, 2? Why would he need 2? That is another question, though. Why would he need 2? Why would he? That is the question. And I don't want answers or spoilers, but that's going to be interesting going forward. They make a note that even the Shinigami aren't sure why he would need 2. Unless it's, interesting. Yeah, because he says that he's not taking either sides. He's just a neutral party, so very curious. I'm not sure what to make of that, but we'll just keep that on the... He's like, I have no idea what drives him to do what he does. So they're like, we don't get Ryuk. But I like that about Ryuk. I like how vague Ryuk is. Ryuk is just here for entertainment. He's just somebody that was bored that's like, I don't know, let's just have some fun. But he's very much... He's a very good observer. He's a very good listener. He doesn't try to boss Light around. He doesn't try to help Light. He's just like, here's some info. Do what you want with it. Just helping you out as a bro. We're all good. I love Ryuk's character. It's really fascinating. And I love that we cut from that one Shinigami with the diamond eyes to Ryuk in order for me to gain the eyes of a Shinigami. And this look from Light when he says, is that right? And he says, yeah. What'll it be? You want to make a deal? And that look, I took a screenshot of that right before I started this discussion. I went back and did some screenshots for the thumbnail. This is one of them, but that look from Light where he's just like, has that seductive look. Like, I get why y'all had a crush on Light. I get it. I get it. It's Miyano Mamoru's voice, and he's drawn very handsomely. Poor Yuri didn't stand a chance. Yuri stood no chance. Girl, we'll talk about her. But she didn't stand a chance. But yeah, Light is just, he's so cocky. Just, it's almost endearing how egotistical Light can be, how he can be. It's almost endearing. That's the sad part, is that he's just like, And I think that Light knew that Ryuk was giving him this information, being like, oh yeah, sure, I'll instantly say yes. I thought he was going to say yes. But then he's like, no, Ryuk. He's like, and Ryuk's just like, he's like, that deal is out of the question. I was surprised. I was like, oh, he's not taking it. Yet. That's the thing. Light brings up, I don't know. Ryuk's put that on the table. Again, we talk about the temptation, right? We talk about how tempting it is. Power is tempting. And I don't know. Light says no now, but I have a theory, and when we get to Ray, we'll talk about that theory. But I have a theory that Light is going to be pushed into a corner where he's basically going to either be found out or he's going to need to pick up the pace and take the offer. We'll see. But yeah, I love the moon comes out and the light is everything's illuminated and his house is illuminated. I love it. I love that when he says no to the deal, the darkness fades away, which would seeming to imply symbolically that was the right decision. Good job, Light. You turned down a very big temptation. For now, I think it's for now. And it makes sense. He says, I want to create an ideal world that is free from criminals. I also intend to reign as the god in that world for a long time. So he's like, I need all the lifespan I can get. So you taking life from me, that's not going to work. No, he's like, if you were granting me life, then sure, I'd be all for it. But no, the thing that's funny is that we have no clue how much time Light actually has. It could be like 4 years. We don't know. Ryuk's not telling him. That's the curious thing. That's one of like the more interesting mysteries of the series, and especially by going on with what some dude pointed out before we started, that the fact that the authors and the creators are not letting us, the audience, know how much time Light actually has. Like, that's the fun part. So we don't know. Maybe Light had 90 years. Maybe he had 5. We don't know, but he's assuming, he's like, I intend to reign as long as I can. He says for a long time, which is funny because he has no clue how much time he has left. And so he's like, then I would consider it if it would lengthen my life, but it's not worth talking about if it's going to shorten it. You of all people should know that. And Ryuk's like, and I will say, Light gets, in this first part of the episode, Light gets a little condescending to a god of death. just a wee bit. Like that first part there, he's like, well, you should know that, Ryuk. And that part's not so much. That part's like, oh, okay, yeah, he really should know that. And Ryuk's just like, well, yeah, I just felt I should tell you it exists. I like that Ryuk tries to backtrack and be like, no, I was just pointing it out just so that it's out there. He's like, I don't want you to complain that I didn't tell you about this earlier. And then Light puts it right back on him. He's like, well, if you didn't tell me about this earlier, he's like, don't you think it's a little too late already? He's like, why didn't you tell me this when we first met? Or why didn't you write it in the instructions in the Death Note if it wasn't something important? He's like, oh yeah, I guess you're right. Again, proving my point that Ryuk is winging this. I think Ryuk is just winging it. He's like, oh, well, and it makes sense why Ryuk didn't put that very specific rule and information about the Shinigami in the Death Note to start with, because Ryuk had no clue who was going to pick it up. So if just some rando picked it up, he's like, well, if you're a boring person, I don't want you to have the eyes of a Shinigami. That seems like it'd cause a bunch of problems. He's like, I don't want some rando just to get these omnipotent powers. You already got it with the Death Note. So I think it makes sense why Ryuk didn't tell him or didn't originally write it in the book. But the more he's gotten to know Light and the more he realized how smart Light is and how capable he is of having this power, I feel like Ryuk feels more comfortable divulging more information about the Death Note as they go. Because yeah, this is an omnipotent power that has lots of subcategories and sub-rules that he's like, I don't want just some layperson knowing all this. That could be dangerous. It's already dangerous enough with Light having it. So yeah, if it had been somebody that didn't have, that's the thing. If it had been somebody that, unlike Light has this idealistic, as Elle would describe it, sense of justice where he's trying to rid the evil people of the world. But what happens if an evil person by light standards had found the notebook to begin with? What if a criminal had found it and instantly started killing like good people? You know, there's that conversation. So I get why Ryuk didn't have all the rules laid out from the beginning, because he didn't know what type of person would find the Death Note. Just put the basics in there and see what happens. But now that he knows who Light is more and knows Light's character more, then now he's like, well, while I'm here, let me go ahead and just tell you some of these other rules. But so that whole, yeah, I guess you're right, is like, and Ryuk is a freaking Shinigami. He could be the one lecturing Light, but he doesn't. He goes, even though I'm a Shinigami, he's never been afraid of me or tried to kiss my butt when it comes to things like this. No. And I think that's why Ryuk likes Light. He's like, Light's not a kiss ass. He's not trying to like suck up to me. He, for all intents and purposes, Light puts himself on the same level as a Shinigami. We'll talk about that. But Ryuk's like, yeah, he's treating me as an equal, which is more than I think Ryuk expected from a human. So that's interesting. He just gives me a hard time. Yes, maybe it's not condescending. Maybe that's not the right word for how Light treats Ryuk sometimes. But he gives him a very hard time. And he's going to say something here in a minute that I was like, Light. but yeah, he just gives Ryuk a hard time. And so this Ray guy, so it's Ray, that's his name. He has blue eyes. You couldn't tell in the last episode because he was in the shadows, but he has such pretty blue eyes. I'm very attracted to blue eyes, so I'm like, But yeah. So yeah, and he's like, you sure there isn't anything else you want to tell me ahead of time? He's like, now's your chance, Ryuk, if you want to bring something up. And I like that ray of light's just going across Light. Funny. He's like, Ryuk the Shinigami. He's like, nope, there's nothing else. Probably. I love that. Again, I love that Ryuk's character is not malicious. Ryuk's character does not mean any ill will by not telling Light these things. He's just like, oh God, there's all these rules. I don't know which ones are important to talk about right now. I love that about Ryuk. He's just like, nah, there's nothing we need to bring up, I think. You know? I love that about him. I love that he's just like, I don't know, I guess when it comes to me. He's such a normal Shinigami, which is such the weird thing to say, but he's not arrogant. He's not pretentious. He's not like holier than thou. He doesn't have this sense of pride or justice. Ryuk is just like the most chill death god that's just like, I don't know. I guess that's why I like him. That there's that air of just chill casualness to him, right? But he doesn't say probably. He just thinks that, which is interesting. And Light's like, how disappointing. And he's like, disappointing? He's like, I may have seriously considered the deal if you'd offered me wings instead of eyes. Wouldn't flying around the sky with wings be godlike? Yeah, so at this point, yeah, that whole Icarus metaphor, the flying close to the sun, that man's always wanted wings to fly. I guess it's the one thing they can't do, right? It's that, the one thing humans can't do is the one thing they're attracted to, right? So this brings up the whole conversation about Light practically being a Shinigami at this point, which is curious. Them having this conversation is what I've been like speculating since episode 1. And Ryuk's like, oh, well, he's like, it's a dream that man has had since ancient times. I like he says ancient times because we bring up the idea of the deal has been around since ancient times. I think that's tied together somehow. The wording of it is too coincidental to have it, he didn't say since the dawn of time. He said since ancient times, just like Ryuk said, it's a deal we've had since ancient times. I still think, I'm like, will Light get wings at some point? He could. I honestly still maintain my theory. And again, if I'm proven wrong by the end of this, it's fine. But I don't want to be disproved now. I want to maintain my theory till the end. But I think that Light over time will practically become like the human version of a Shinigami. And I could be wrong. It's fine if I am. But I just want to wait till the end to find that out. Because he's talking about like getting the eyes of the Shinigami, which he's turned down for now. I think he'll eventually take them. He's talking about gathering wings, and Ryuk's just like, Ryuk doesn't say that's not possible. That's the thing. He goes, you'd stand out if you sprouted wings and started flying around. He's like, you'd stand out. I bet you get arrested by the police just for that. He doesn't say, oh, that's not possible. Never says that. He just says, oh, well, wouldn't that make you really obvious to the police? You wouldn't want that. But he doesn't say it's not possible. I was fully expecting him to be like, oh, well, We can't do that as Shinigami. He doesn't say that, for the record. He says that was a joke. He says, however, if I continue to cut deals for eyes and wings, I'm going to end up becoming a real Shinigami. That could be amusing, don't you think? As we look directly into the camera. Yeah, that'd be amusing, right? And then he says, don't worry, even without all that, you're already a fine Shinigami. Because essentially, yeah, that is the thing of it. That is the thing of it. Light wants to be a god. He kind of is. Having the Death Note, he kind of is a god of death. That's literally what he's been doing this whole series so far, is killing people with the Death Note. How is that any different than being a Shinigami? How is it any different? It's not. And Ryuk's like, you don't need wings and the eyes that I have to do what you're doing. You're already kind of a Shinigami. And he points out the Shinigami realm is rotten these days. I just love that there's just the bones. It looks like the elephant graveyard. He says they all live vacant lives and only take human lives. And we see that one again. We see the Shinigami from episode 1. Just because they don't want to die. No one even knows why we exist. Well, it seems like why they exist is to take human lives, but there's so many caveats and weird rules with the Shinigami. Again, my theory is that the Shinigami are humans that are stuck in this limbo and have become Shinigami. They're just stuck in this limbo between heaven and hell, and that's their punishment, right? Seems like that's their divine punishment, is they're forced to live in this existence that is neither heaven nor hell, and they have to put out the will of whatever this god is, or this omnipotent being that's over them. Something has to have made the original Death Note. Something had to originally put them in this place. I mean, how did it spring up from nowhere, right? We don't know. But I like that Ryuk is suggesting that humans and Shinigami aren't too different in the fact that they're, lots of humans question the whole purpose of existence. Why do we exist? That's the big existential question, why we exist. And it's neat to see here that Ryuk's suggesting that Shinigami ask the exact same question. They're like, we don't know why we're here either. So that's really fascinating. I like that Ryuk is showing this similarity between Shinigami and mankind in that they question their existence, and a lot of them, because their world is just as rotten as the human world, fall into these patterns of gambling and of just killing people and taking lives to exist and to keep. There's like that survival instinct that's with the Shinigami, just like it is with humanity. So showing those similarities is very interesting. And he's like, I doubt there's any reason at all for our existence. So it's funny that a death god is nihilistic, right? That there's no reason why we exist. Like, there's no purpose in living. I feel like it's funny that a literal death deity is nihilistic. That's so crazy to me, right? But it's interesting. And so he says, you're much more of a Shinigami than they are. So he's basically suggesting, he's like, Light, you're doing the same thing that a Shinigami is doing, but you have a purpose. You have a idealistic goal in mind. You're living for something. There's some reason that you exist, and you've discovered that, and you're living for it. He's like, the Shinigami in my world, they are just sitting there biding time and stealing lives to keep from going wherever. We don't know what happens when a Shinigami dies. Where do they go? Do they go to heaven or hell? Is that a totally different thing? Do they just cease to exist? Are they reborn as a human? Is that the whole thing, like the thing of rebirth? Are they reborn as a human? How does this work? We don't know the answers yet. And I'm curious to know if we'll find them to know throughout the series, but I don't want to know for sure yet. So please no spoilers. I know it's tempting. I'm sure it's tempting for people to just to tell me. But yeah, I love this idea. He's like, you're more of a Shinigami than they are. And Light's like, He's like, well, from what you're saying, it sounds like I'm doing a lot more work. How condescending he can be. I love it. Where he's like, well, I'm doing a lot more work than them death gods. It's like, Light. It cracks me up. It cracks me up. He's like, but don't lump me together with the Shinigami. I'm using the Death Note as a human for humans. He's like, I'm not doing this for your kind. I'm doing this for my own people. And I'm going to be the god of humans. Like, I don't want to be with them others. Him separating himself, like it's so funny that Light is like making his human side like more elitist than the death gods. It's great. Oh my god. And so then this part right here, where he's like, I wouldn't say that the Shinigami realm is meaningless to humans either. So yeah, and Ryuk's like, what are you talking about? And he's like, well, think about it. Whenever Shinigami like you comes into the human world once every 100, no 1,000 years. I'm like, how does he know? How does Light know this every 100 or 1,000 years? How does he know it's been that long? What other humans have told you about finding Shinigami? Maybe that's like a cultural thing. Maybe it's like lore in Japan that I'm not aware of. But I was like, how do you know when a Shinigami comes or not? The human world changes greatly. The Shinigami realm's existence is fearfully meaningful. So he's like, even though you don't think that your existence has purpose, like it does have an impact on humanity, which is really cool to note. I'm glad that Light brings that up. And Ryuk's like, oh, is that so? He's like, you just told me the Shinigami realm was rotten. It's this part right here that I about laughed. Maybe I did laugh. When you return there from this world, how about using what you've learned here to try to change it? I don't think that Light meant to be condescending in that moment, but he just tried to educate a death god. He just tried to school them. That's so funny to me. Or he's like, look at all that you've learned from me, Ryuk. Take that back home with you. Like, okay. I'm like, you act like Ryuk's not been around for hundreds of thousands, possibly of years, and has met other humans. I mean, Ryuk knows the rules of the Death Note. Who's to say that like the earring that he has on his ear isn't from a human he's encountered with the Death Note before? He clearly knows how this Death Note works, how these deals work, and the results of them. So I want to tell Light, like, how do you know Ryuk's not already dealt with humans with the Death Note and has taken their lives and part of them and kept it with him? It's so funny. It's just hilarious that Light, I don't know why. It's just really funny that he's like, how about you take what you've learned back home with you? like look at all you've learned from me. And Ryuk's like, there's like a hesitancy there, like a beat. And he goes, Light, you may just be quite the positive thinker. He doesn't say, thanks, sure, I'll do that. He's just like, wow, you're really optimistic, huh? God, it's so funny. I love their dynamic. I really do. And then Light's like, well, of course I am. Of course I'm a positive thinker. If I wasn't, I wouldn't be trying to use the Death Note to make the world a better place. That is the craziest thing about this all, is that even now, there's this weird dynamic that Light is still under the impression that everything he is doing is for the betterment of humanity, and that him becoming a god is to make the world a better place. So that's what makes Light so dangerous and interesting, is that he fully believes that he is the good guy. He is doing everything for the sake of humanity and is in no way in the wrong. Like, that's the crazy part, right? Because, again, obligatory Attack on Titan Season 4 spoiler. Eren, if we're going to compare Light and Eren, because in episode 1, I compared Light and Eren a lot, and some people were like, well, there's some differences. And I feel like as this series goes on, I'm going to find those differences, and they're going to become more and more apparent, which is fun and exciting. I'm glad that already Light and Eren are different people. But there's a big drastic difference here that I did want to point out that I was thinking of in the moment. And that is, Eren understands, by the end of season 4, I think Eren understands that what he's doing is wrong and is bad and is something that shouldn't happen, but he feels like he has no choice and there's nothing else he can do to achieve his goals. Like, this is the only option for him to achieve his goals. And so even though he laments the fact that it's sad and he hates it, he still goes through with it because that's the only option he feels that he has. And it's tragic and very sad. Light is not aware that what he's doing has any wrong to it. He believes that everything he's doing is fine. It's all towards the betterment of humanity. It's great. I am not evil in any way, shape, or form. I am perfectly fine, and what I'm doing is morally right. Like, that's a huge difference, right? So I think that's interesting. So end of that spoiler business. We're done there. But I just wanted to point that out. what I'm thinking of. But yeah, Light thinks that what he's doing is morally right. He doesn't see anything wrong. He's not the bad guy. No. And on the surface, you think, yeah, Light is killing these criminals, and that's kind of what the police department is struggling with about their idea of morality and justice. But then you watch Light do some actions in this episode that I'm like, you're using people and really taking advantage of some things. And it's like, oh, okay. All right, we'll talk about Yuri and Raye in this episode. But yeah, but then you have Light trying to who killed Lindell Taylor, but he was doing it under the guise of killing Elle, who had committed no crimes, none whatsoever, and was totally fine with that because it was trying to weed out someone that was against the god of this new world. So they must be evil because they're against me as the god. It's like, ugh. And Ray has not committed any crimes other than following Elle and other than following Light and potentially outing him. But Light's like, well, yeah, this guy's with the FBI. He finds out he's with the FBI. He's like, yeah, this guy's following me, so I need to get rid of him. Ray's committed no crimes. He's just following him. But it's that idea that anybody that's against me, the god of this new world, is evil. Like, there's people that are committing evil acts around the world. They are evil. There's people that are harassing others. They are evil. But then anyone that opposes me is evil. And here's the thing. We'll talk about it later in the moment. Light's dad is against him. So is Light going to kill his dad because that makes him evil? We'll talk about this, but I'm like, whoa, it's just fascinating because Light does not think he's in the wrong at all. And then he goes back to the rules, and that's where Light gets an idea, an awful idea. And so this whole thing, I am glad that this show is exploring what is possible and not possible with the Death Note this early on. I'm really glad because some of the things that get brought up in this, I'm like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. So I'm glad we talked about this, but we have these 6 deaths. 3 of them exhibited bizarre behaviors before they died. And I was like, well, what about the other 3? And then we find out. And so, again, I love that this is all during the daylight. So there's the pentagram that is there on the wall with blood on his fingers. There's a letter that was left behind that seems unimportant. And then there's the 3rd that just went to the bathroom to escape. Okay. So I love that. So here's the thing with Elle. Elle, I'm questioning whether, I said in the last episode, whether Elle was like trapped in this room. I'm wondering if this room that Elle's in is just a space that's outside of his apartment or something, or like in like part of an office or in his home or something. Because I'm like, there's no way Elle just sits there all day unless if it is a prison, somebody's just giving him food and water. But I don't think that's the case. I feel like this is his like workspace and it's just remote and by itself so that nothing else can like give a hint of where he's at. Because yeah, there's nothing in this room but metal walls. So you can't trace it from inside. It would probably block out different things. And then if that's the only thing in the room, there's nothing to discern his location inside that room, which is important. And the way that he organizes everything is that there's the monitor, there's the desktop there, you have the screen, you have the monitor, you have the camera, you have the microphone. They're all in a line next to each other so that you can't tell what the brand of the computer is. You can't tell what the brand of the microphone is. Nothing is discernible from that location except Elle. That's the interesting thing. And that's very like, shows that he's trying to keep his identity a secret. And he brings up Watari. I'm glad that this Ray guy is not Watari. Very glad, because I was afraid that they'd learn about Watari. And so then they bring up the thing about the cases. And they show the picture in the letter. Okay. And the bathroom photo. A note describing a fear of Kira. We're going to look at that too. Okay, so yeah, Elle's trying to piece together. And I think Elle is a really good deducer of the situation and what's going on. And that makes me worry because I'm like, Light, I don't think Light gives Elle enough credit. I think that he assumes about Elle a little more than he needs to. And so yeah, Elle's like, do not let the media know anything. Again, this is Elle trying to weed out that this is definitely somebody involved in the police force. Because when he says, do not let any other information be known by the public, I think that's Elle's way of saying, okay, we're going to narrow this down even further. So if the police doesn't trust me, we're going to make sure that the police realize that this is somebody from the inside that's leaking information. Because if they put this stuff out to the media, and it made it to where it was public in Japan, well, then they wouldn't know if Kira was somebody within the police force or not, because the information is public. But by making sure that this stays within the police force, if L gets a clue that hints that Light is onto them, then he's going to be able to tell the police force, look, we didn't leak this information out. So if Kira's onto us, that means Kira's getting information from the inside. So it is somebody from the police force, and we can't deny that fact because none of this other stuff was public. They had to have cracked our system to do it. And I'm sure the police force could argue that it was a hacker and not somebody from within, but they can't rule out at that point that it's somebody from within either. So interesting. And then I like that the detective, Mr. Yagami, is like, that they're saying Kira's performing some kind of test and we can't give him the results. But Light can figure out from the inside. And then the police force are like, performing tests on criminals? That's horrible. And then it's funny that they say that, because you're like, oh, well, they're criminals, right? You know, the whole eye for an eye argument. But then Mr. Yagami says, he's playing with people's lives as if this is a game. This is unforgivable. Yeah, so that's the one thing about Light. Light, on the one hand, is doing this all for the sake of humanity, to make the world an idealistic place. But by playing God, he's using people, and it is kind of like a game. He's just playing with people's lives, like with Yuri. And then obviously with the Ray guy and this one criminal, making him go through that death. Like, yeah. So when Light's dad says this is unforgivable, that's like a big red flag. I'm like, oh, I was like, if his dad is so strong, becomes so strongly opposed to Kira and finds out that his son is Kira, then, because he's right there in their house. Like, if he finds out, if he just suspects and just stumbles by accident upon the wrong thing, like if he stumbles on accident upon Light committing a murder or writing in the death note or talking to Ryuk out loud and stumbles upon it, then is Light gonna have to kill his dad? I think he will. I think he's gonna get to the point where he's gonna have to kill his dad. And what is that gonna do? Like, that's gonna just destroy the whole family, right? So it's setting up, this episode sets up a lot of things. On the surface, as I'm watching the episode, I'm like, man, this is really like a compact episode. But once you start breaking it down, no, there's lots of foreshadowing and weird things. And I love that Elle is just in the darkness with just the computer as the light. It's so creepy. It mirrors Light a lot, because when Light's in his room, everything's dark except for the computer screen. It's a nice mirror between these two characters. It's very interesting. So I'm saying, what is he trying to achieve? Well, he's trying to out you. He's trying to out Ray right now, but in the process, out Elle. And then, of course, Light's really excited. He's like, look, Ryuk, the results have already been put into the dad's computer. Ha, ha, ha. They're on to me. And so, Keto Nawarami, kidnapping murder. Okay, the results are just as I expected. The death note will work for what I have in mind. And Ryuk's like, what are you talking about? He's like, one escaped and went to the bathroom I designated. So the series of deaths that he has planned out for these 6 people, they all just are to test different things. So the one is very basic. It's just like, okay, if I tell him to go to the bathroom to die, will it happen? It did. And so that was test number 1. And so he says, Tamiki, heart attack, escapes from cell, dies at 6 p.m. Masakai, heart attack, draws symbol on the wall. He's like, another drew the same symbol I drawn in the death note. Okay, so he wrote the little pentagram symbol in there, and he's like, if it's something that the criminal knows or that is easy to draw and doesn't have any, like, doesn't require any, because that's the thing, even if you don't know the symbolism behind it, as long as you know that it's just a basic symbol, like if I tell you to draw a triangle, you'll draw a triangle, regardless of what the triangle means. If I have you draw a swastika, then, I mean, that symbol has a different meaning in Japanese culture than it does to other audiences. So as long as it's something that's just a shape that doesn't necessarily have to have a meaning that you understand, and I tell you to draw it, then it's possible. So that all makes sense. That's person number 2. Okay. And then he says, yet another wrote the same letter I had written in the death note. And the death note letter said, Lord have mercy, do what I can. I'll either be hanged or you know it, killed by Kira. I know about him. He's going to get me. Interesting. Yeah. And it just seems like a random letter, right, at first? These three did exactly what I wanted. I purposely wrote very difficult tasks for the other three to test the limits of the Death Note. Yeah, so the one, Yuzo Fura dies in front of the Eiffel Tower, France today at 6 p.m. So yeah, okay, so you can't just make somebody go somewhere not physically possible. He's like, in an hour, that person can't go from Japan to France. So since it doesn't work, they just die from a heart attack. Okay, makes sense. Kabioka, heart attack, draws the exact image of L's face on the prison wall. So yeah, he doesn't know what L looks like, so he can't draw it, so he just dies a regular death. Makes sense. But then here's the one, Shinshiro Yamame, heart attack, writes a note stating, I know that L is suspicious of the Japanese police. That one is interesting because on the surface it seems like, well, why couldn't he just write those letters in random words, right? They string together to make a sentence, but why can't he write it? But the suspect has no clue who L is and doesn't know that L is suspicious of the Japanese police. So he can't make people tell lies before they die. He can't make people before their death tell information that they don't know. So that part is interesting. There is a clause in there that says that that Light, I keep wanting to call him L because L and Light, same letters. But somebody in the comments for episode 2 was like, L, more like W. And I was like, yeah, you know. But Light cannot manipulate. He can't control the minds or the knowledge of humans. That is an interesting caveat because it kind of questions that whole thing about free will and God, because there's some people that have the concept of, well, is there even a thing about free will if, you know, God is, and in the last episode I said like God making decisions, and what I meant by that was like when you pray to a God, you pray for like forgiveness or you pray for someone to be healed or something like that. So, you know, in doing so, you are under the assumption that that God is going to actually make the decision to heal that person or to help protect that person, right? So it's interesting that in this world with the Death Note, even though Light has positioned himself as a God, he cannot control the free will of humans. He cannot give them information they don't already know. He can't implant information into that person. And he can make a person go somewhere. He can make a person end up dying at a location as long as it's feasible, as long as it is within the realm of possibility, right? That's interesting. He's like, I thought this might work, but it didn't happen. So he did think that that would work, but no. It means that people can't write about things they don't know or things they didn't come up with on their own. So he can't make people think things they don't, that he can't control their free will or their thoughts. That's a great caveat. Glad that doesn't work. Yeah, glad that that's not a thing. So he can't make people lie about things they don't know. In short, it means that not even the Death Note can't do the impossible. And Ryuk just, I love that Ryuk just sits there like, like that blank stare. It's so funny. It's still so cute. I love it. First, in the weirdest of ways, Ryuk is kind of cute. It's kind of like, you know, you see a dog that's so ugly, it's cute. That's how I feel about Ryuk. He's like a pug. It's like the Shinigami form of a pug. He's just those big fishbowl eyes, right? As long as it's something, sorry for pug owners, but they are so ugly that they're cute. I will stand by that. They are adorable, but in the weirdest of ways. As long as it's something a person realistically is likely to do, I can control them as much as I want before he dies. So yeah, as long as it's realistic and something they can do, Light can control them. It's not sketch at all, not suspicious. And that's such a thing, like, and Ryuk's like, oh, you figured that out, but what are you going to try to do, Light? And he's like, L and the police will never figure out my true goal. It's like, he's so confident. I'm like, okay, sure. Sure thing. The great detective is probably trying to decipher the picture and the letter those criminals left. And I did say that he wasn't, but he kind of is. They're absolutely meaningless final words. And that makes this next part interesting because he says they're meaningless. He says there's no point to them. And he says if Kira used those criminals as guinea pigs, he's about to start something, which he's just trying to out you. He's like, if he moves now, there is a chance that the FBI will notice someone acting suspiciously. But if he has a different goal in mind, the letter in the picture might be some kind of message. Which is funny because in the reaction, I was like, oh no, L's onto you. And I'm like, well, but the funny thing is that Light's like, oh, those pictures were meaningless. They don't have a point. I just did them randomly. But then he looks at the message. And when he looks at the message, he's like, is this it? He's like, L, do you know? And it's the first letter. So that's what's curious. It's like, did Light mean to have that L, do you know at the top there? Or is it just random happenstance? Is it just random coincidence and the stars aligned that line is on there? That's the funny thing. Like if Light didn't mean for L to find that message or for it to mean anything at all, then that's curious, right? Because it's almost like fate, like stuff beyond Light's comprehension, linking them together. I don't know. That's very curious though. But his whole thing is like the main act is that he's trying to get Ray to out himself. And it goes like clockwork, right? He says, yesterday on the news, there was a drug addict who tried to rob a bank, but failed. Kichiro Osarita. Wanted criminal. I'll use him. It's last minute, but I'm sure I can find someone. I'll try to ask out a few. He's like, ask out a few? And so the sad thing by that logic is we don't know if Yuri was the first person he called and it just happened to work out. We don't know that. Or if she was like the 8th person that he called and she's just the only one that picked up that would work. That's the sad thing. I feel bad for Yuri in this episode because she is literally just played. She's just a tool. Just part of a means of him to out Ray. That's all her purpose is. And that sucks because she seems like a nice girl that just thought she was going on a date with Light. And this is the other thing about Light that I'm like, God, you're so egotistical. He goes, Ryuk, I may not look it, but I'm pretty popular. I was like, God, he's so egotistical, right? What a prick. Because, yeah, I'm like, wow, well, I mean, you are voiced by Miyano Mamoru, and you are a very handsomely drawn character. So, yeah, he's just, it's kind of like, I'm not saying that Light's a serial killer. Even though he kind of is. But, you know, there's so many, like, serial killers that you see on the news, at least here in the U.S., that are handsome guys, that are nice-looking guys, that seemed like just nice people, right? They seemed like that. And then when you finally figured out, no, they're like a sociopath and used people and then became serial killers. No, Light's fitting the persona. He's checking off some boxes here of at least what I would expect as somebody in the US. Like, he's checking off some boxes. It's just like, and it's that ego that just like, I'm doing nothing wrong. This is totally fine. I can use people. It's all for the greater good, right? But yeah, him calling this girl Yuri with the little dog keychain on her phone. And then, yeah. And she's like, oh, Light, good morning. Like, oh, hey, classmate. Why are you calling me so early? And then we cut to the next day. And him with the trench coat. And he just seems totally fine with it. And then, yeah, Ray's falling behind him. He's still following me, isn't he? And he's such a nice looking guy. I'm like, oh, no. He's like, that's perfect. If my shadow wasn't here, there'd be no point in what I'm going to do next. Which is sad in itself. He's like, man, he's like, what Light is basically saying is if my shadow wasn't following me, if this Reikai wasn't following me, then I've just wasted my day going on this date with this rando girl. Again, I feel sorry for Yuri. I feel bad for her because she thinks that this is a date and that there's an actual chance of him getting to hang out. He's like, a date? He's like, yeah. He's like, it's a date no matter how you look at it. There's no point in denying it, even to my shadow. And he's like, it's not a normal date, is it? Ryuk's like, this will be boring if you're just going to go canoodle with a girl. You said you found a way to find out your shadow's name. But, and he's like, what do you plan to do? And I like that Light's like, didn't you see what I wrote in the death note? This is a good thing to note. And I feel like Light's going to take note of this. He's like, what? Weren't you watching me? Ryuk's like, no. I respect Ryuk. He's like, nah. He's like, it would be boring to peek. Huh. I like that detail. I like that Ryuk's like, no, I'm not watching what you're writing. He's like, I want to see it all play out. And I feel like Light's going to take that little chunk of knowledge and use it later. Again, I feel like it's foreshadowing. He's like, then just be patient and watch what happens. And Ryuk's like, oh. And so, yeah, then this girl, I love that Light's coat is like, he has the blood. His coat is white, right? His coat is white, which suggests like innocence and good, but underneath it, it's black. So it's like, that color symbolism. And she's like, we haven't been Spaceland since junior high, and they're third years, so it's been like 4 or 5 years since they've been together. Since she's been. She's like, I'm so excited, and I get to be alone with you. And he's like, yeah, like, we're on a date. Yeah, so I wonder, I'm like, does Light not feel bad at all that he's just strung this girl along to have, and she's like just witnessed a traumatic incident that will probably change her life forever. And Light's just like, well, I got my job done. Everything went according to plan. I've traumatized this girl in my class for life, but no worries. It's all good. And I feel bad for Ray, because we find out that Ray's been a shadow to him, but he's just been working with the FBI to gather information. He's like on an occasional date on his day off. He's he's a serious high school student. Light Yagami, son of Chief Yagami. No grounds for suspicion. And then he says, he didn't suspect him at all. He's like, at any rate, today is my last day of following him. That's what's sad about all this, is that Light doesn't know why Ray's following him. Well, I mean, he suspects that he's following him to gather information, but Light doesn't know the extent of what Ray knows, what Ray's purpose is, like what Ray's going to do with this information, like whatever. He doesn't know. But the funny thing is that Ray wasn't like trying to kill him. He wasn't going to arrest him. He was just there to gather intel. And up until now, he had no grounds for suspicion on Light at all. And if Light, here's the thing, if Light, that's what's going to be interesting about this, is that if he said today was my last day of following him. So it's such a curious thing about what we know and don't know as humans. We can't, because we don't know the full picture, because we can't see the full picture, we can't possibly know the outcomes and ramifications of everything. So our free will does play a part, because if Light had just let Ray go, if he had just let Ray go and do his thing, Ray probably would have been like, no grounds for suspicion, no reason to suspect him. I'm done, case closed, we can just back off of Light. There's no further need for investigation. But because this whole incident happens, because Ray notices that this is a criminal that's been on the media and sees him die this random death, is he going to let Light off the hook, or is he going to have this suspicion come back onto Light? Like, man, this guy just randomly died on the same bus as Light, is like Kira, and Kira can get to determine the time and place of death. Did he, and he's been writing these notes or whatever, is there a chance? Because they all think that there's some kind of like, they all think that Light has some kind of like telepathic ability, is the gist that I get from this, is that the police thinks that Kira has some kind of telepathic ability to kill that extends time, that allows him to like determine the time and place of death and kills them from without contact. And so it would not be suspect for Ray to think that maybe Light is Kira, because this random criminal just happened to die this death and didn't hurt anybody. So I don't know. I feel like it's going to be such an interesting commentary. I don't know what's going to happen in the next episode or the one after it, but it's going to be interesting to see if Ray ends up dying, or if Ray ends up being connected to a death, if Light had just let it go, if he had just let this guy go, then whatever happens in the future episodes could have been avoided. That's going to be interesting to see how this episode's actions are going to impact the rest of the series. Because yeah, Ray was going to let him go. He was like, no grounds for suspicion, ordinary, serious high school student. After today, I'm done. And if he'd just let him go and hadn't orchestrated this entire death, then he may have never been found out. That's going to be what's interesting about this episode, is seeing the trajectory of what happens because Light takes action and because Light takes it upon himself to out this man, to kill him. I feel like this episode is going to be one that I look back on and be like, oh, was this all just big major foreshadowing? And I don't want to be spoiled, but that's where my headspace is now. And so, yeah, so they're just on this casual date. And then this criminal gets onto the bus, and it's all so perfectly orchestrated. It makes so much sense that he wrote the guy getting on the bus, derailing it. Everything went according to plan. And it was just, even the position of where they sit on the bus, he sat in that one booth, leaving the back booth open so that Ray could go and sit behind them, right? It was all just flawlessly orchestrated. It was all just according to plan. Like, everything was mapped out. And he's like, he's here. Like, God, it was... And the way lighting works in this show, the darkness of the van, the light from the outside, this is going to work out perfectly. And it does. It all... Even to the point where he has 2 notes, right? He has the note that he's writing to Yuri, telling her not to worry, that he's going to steal the gun. He has that note, and he puts it back in his pocket, and he gets out the piece of the death note that has the day of the date so that the guy can pick it up so he can see Ryuk. But there's a little extra point on this, right? There's some extra points on this. And again, he taps Yuri's shoulder and shows her the note, but he shows her it in a way that Ray can see behind him and read what it says, right? It says, Yuri, don't worry. I'll look for the chance to grab his hand that's holding the pistol. Okay? So again, and then that's when he's like, it's dangerous, don't do it. If it comes to that, I'll do it. And then Light... So here's the thing. He's like, all right. He's like, it's all right. We don't have to pass notes. As long as we whisper, he won't hear us over the sound of the bus. And so then he puts it back in his pocket. And he says, do you have proof that you're not an accomplice? So this is another thing. I know that Light did this. As a means of outing Ray, of getting Ray to prove himself by showing the ID, right? He did this as a means to an end, right? But I'm wondering if before Ray dies, if Ray is going to share this information with Elle. If before Ray dies, Ray's going to be like, hey, was on the bus with Light. Here's what happened. Here's all the events that unfolded. And then if Ray dies, Elle's going to be like, oh, then it's him, right? I don't know. Because, yeah, the question is going to be, is Light going to kill Ray before he is able to relay that information to Elle? That is going to be the case. Is it going to happen? And if he suspects Light and Mr. Yagami finds out, then how is that going to affect things? What's going to happen there? And he's like, it's pretty common. He's like, the culprit pretends he's alone, and just in case, he'll leave someone to keep watching the back. And he's like, oh, yeah. And she's like, oh, no, do you really think? And then he's like, I have no choice. Yeah, like Light outs him. He makes him have to prove it, right? It's so flawless. Like, it's a great plan. It works out. But I'm like, and then he says there's no way that Light could be Kira. Kira could kill the culprit with a heart attack. So he doesn't suspect Light in this moment. He's like, Kira could just kill him, right? If he's this idealistic person just trying to make the world a better place, why wouldn't he just kill him and stop the problem? Because that's not Light's whole deal. Light may be trying to make the world this idealistic place, but he's also trying to kill you. And Ray doesn't realize that. But I'm still wondering if Ray is going to tell Elle this information of how the incident went down. And then if he tells Elle that he showed Light a picture of himself, and Elle's surprised, or Elle, I keep calling him Elle, sorry, it's Light. And if Light seems surprised that Elle's using the FBI, he's like, oh, this isn't just the police force. It's not just my dad. It's beyond that. Like, the FBI is involved now. He's like, oh. So that's going to be interesting to see what Light does with that information that now the FBI is investigating. He's like, oh. But yeah, I really hope that Ray tells Elle that Light knew his ID and name before he dies. Like, I don't know if that's going to happen or not. There's a part of me that thinks it won't, but Ray Pember. Oh, Ray. And that smile, where his mouth just goes, I'm like, no! It's like light rides the line between you're like, oh, you're so charming and endearing, and no, you're a serial killer. Like, just, He's like, I trust you. I won't ask why an FBI agent is on board with us, but he's like, do you have a gun? He's like, yes, I do. He's like, so if something happens, I can rely on you, right? He's like, yes. And then, And this guy doesn't fire on anybody, right? He doesn't shoot anybody. He's a drug addict who tried to rob a bank. And he killed 3 civilians and ran away. Okay, so he has killed people. Never mind. Yeah. Everything will be all right. He'll never point the gun at us. Damn. And that's when... Okay, so the one note he put back inside his breast coat, and then inside the pocket, inside there. And the death note part is the one he let fall out. Clever. And then he sees... I love that you show him... I love that he sees the shadow of Ryuk, because he touched the death note, touched the page, and he saw him. Oh, who the hell are you? What are you trying to pull? And Ray thinks that it's him that he's talking about, but no. How long? And they think he's hallucinating from the drugs that he's been addicted to. It all worked out so well. And it makes sense now that Light chose someone that was a drug addict for this, because that would seem plausible with the hallucinations. Like, why would a random guy, even a criminal, hallucinate? Well, if he was a drug addict, he was suffering from withdrawals, or maybe he was on a drug. It all makes sense, right? And then he tells this guy everything. He tells this guy everything and mentions Light's name. Ryuk just like puts out everything. And I'm amazed the guy didn't be like, who's Light? What's happening? Like, if that criminal had said, what do you mean Light? Then Ray would have been like, what? You know, like, but he doesn't do it. He does it. There's so many opportunities that he could have outed Light. And Ryuk almost made it to the point where the guy had all the info. He could have said something, been like, Shinigami, Light. He could have just said whatever. Does not do that. So it's almost like Ryuk's trying to even the playing field, being like, I'm just going to say this. Maybe he'll repeat it and out you, Light. I don't know. But no. He's like, anyone who touches the death note will be able to see me. I'm always hovering behind you. Shinigami cannot die from gunshots. All that stuff I've told Light. Is pretty impressive how he put it all together. And yeah, he mentions like he's the nation's top scorer. He used the hijacking to get the name of the guy falling behind him. Like Ryuk puts all that information out there. All of it. And if the criminal wasn't freaked out beyond all logical reason, if he had just repeated anything that Ryuk said, then Ray could have heard it and would have been on to what was going on. But the criminal, he was too shell-shocked and was like, oh my God. And he sees the guy coming after him and has him open the bus door, and that's when he gets hit by the car. Damn. And poor Yuri. Yuri just sees it all out through the window, and we see her reaction. And she's just like, we cut to Ray seeing it, and then we cut to Yuri. We don't see Light's face, but we see Yuri just staring at it in awe, like just in complete shock of what happened. And then we cut to Light just looking at his watch, like, right on schedule. Oh my God. Yeah, wanted criminal Kichiro Soreda, accidental death. And just wrote down, like, how everything was gonna happen. So he says he'd get on the bus to Spaceland, he will enter with a gun, and will see a phantom from another world and fire his bullets at it. So he didn't do the whole hijacking thing. Interesting. So a lot of that was the criminal. Then he'll flee from the bus. And immediately afterwards, on the same day, will die in an accident. So, but it didn't say on any of those, in those notes, unless they just didn't choose to give us confirmation of that. But it didn't say that he wouldn't kill anybody. Right? Maybe it was in the notes and it just didn't take time to repeat everything that happened. But yeah, just the blood, like, encasing his hand and everything. The death note never deviates. And so Ray's just like, interesting. You're next, Ray Pember. Ooh, interesting. Interesting. Oh my god. Okay. Whew. Yeah, so like I said, I don't know if Ray is going to give his update to Elle before he dies, or if he's going to die without Elle getting all the information. I feel like if Ray can give the information of that trip to Elle is going to piece together things, right? And he's going to at least come to some conclusion. But we just don't know as the audience what yet. We're just not privy to that. But that's so fascinating. Yeah, so yeah. How about that? Yeah, that's, oh man. This episode, like I said, it seems on the surface like it's just proving that Light knows how to use the Death Note and knows the whole system and how to manipulate it to find out Ray's identity. But I feel like there's a lot of foreshadowing. There is a lot of things like being just thrown on the table that's like, we're just going to put this here and maybe we'll come back to it that we don't know about as the audience. But yeah, it's interesting for sure. Very curious to see what's going to happen with these characters moving forward. Very curious indeed. So I'm feeling for Yuri. That poor girl just got used this episode. I feel bad for Ray. Ray was just doing his job and was just going to leave after confirming that there was no suspicion, and now he's going to die. Oh. And he didn't do anything wrong. Except follow Light. Except make Ryuk creeped out. That was his biggest crime, is he creeped Ryuk out. And we can't have that. So, oh my gosh, what an episode. I'm very excited to watch this in the dub and to hear Ray's English dub voice. But yeah, I'll tell you all about that when we get back for episode 5. But so this episode was great. I'm curious to know your thoughts down below. Please, no spoilers. But I hope you all enjoyed this reaction and discussion. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back next week with episode 5 of Death Note.